Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Okay? Good. All right. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Let's look at a few of your questions. Can there be blameworthy silence? Yes, yes, yes. So you don't make silence a substitute for speech. We are speaking creatures, but when we speak, we want to speak correctly, wisely, in the right situations. What if someone knows something is wrong but stays silent? Well, we'll talk a little bit about that today, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the days ahead. Yes, sometimes when people say things very wrong, it's important for you to speak, but not always. And that's something that we will talk a little bit about today, hopefully. You must never feel that because someone says something that is not correct, that you have a personal obligation to intervene and to correct them. It may be that you have to wait. It may be that you have to use wisdom. It may be that there's no benefit. So there are a number of considerations, and we want to speak as intelligent human beings, and we want to use our speech. It's a sword. We want to use it as an instrument of great good and never use it as an instrument of harm. What should our intentions be when keeping silent as an act of worship? How do these change in social settings as opposed to when we're alone? That's a very good question. And I think we will talk about certain aspects of silence today that may help to answer that question. Because today we want to talk about superfluous speech, and we want to talk about things that don't concern us. So whenever you avoid saying things that are wrong or are hurtful, then you should make that an act of worship. Okay, this is that I will not say this. I will keep silent. I'm not going to hurt this person. And especially in our relationships with our families, our mothers, our fathers, our spouses, our children. It's really, really important to watch your tongue and do that as an act of worship. Nothing destroys marital relations like ignorant speech. Nothing destroys it like ignorant speech. What makes one language greater than another? Well, that's a very big question. And yesterday we were talking about how great ancient languages are. And so there are many things we could debate in this regard. And not everyone would agree with me. But ancient languages, and if you open your dictionary, you're always going to go back to the era of ancient languages. That what did our words originally mean when they came from Latin or Greek or Germanic or whatever thousands of years ago? But ancient languages are metaphysically sophisticated. And that metaphysical sophistication is right there in the letters and the words. And they're also spiritually sophisticated. If we wanted to talk about Saxon, which is the language that English speakers spoke over 1,000 years ago, Saxon amazingly can talk about almost everything that we talk about in Islam, beautifully. You talk about the ajal, the time that's allotted for your life, and they talk about the same thing. So it's amazing how rich ancient languages often are. Their vocabularies are extremely meaningful. If we wanted to talk a great deal about the pseudo-metaphysics of modernity and postmodernity, we might talk about things like matter, things that are created from matter. And we might talk about things like measurement, because modern scientism is based on intervention into creation with instruments, making measurements, which are often arbitrary, and then doing calculations with them. Of course, we do amazing things by that. But if you go back into ancient languages, including our own ancient languages, you'll see that concepts like matter are nothing like the concepts that we have today in the wake of the development of modern Western science. Al-makanu bil-makin. So we were talking about the blessed city of Konya, and that I regard it to be a holy city, as many of you would agree. And this is because of the great people who are here, who are stationed here until the day of judgment, like Sadruddin Qunawi, Shams Tabrizi, who was a great scholar, profound knower of God. And he was the Sheikh of Jalaluddin, and then Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. So whenever you have people like that in a place, that place takes on a special blessing. And then the question goes, what about the land where Pharaoh is buried? Is that a bad land? Pharaoh doesn't count. He's not a makin. These evil people who live in history, like Nimrod, Pharaoh, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, and others, they are people who hardly even exist. Probably I shouldn't say that, because it will be so easy to misunderstand. But, you know, they play their act out on the stage, and then they go to their destiny. And they are not what we call makin. They have no weight in the next world whatsoever. Whereas people like the prophets, the messengers, the great awliya, they continue to be influential even after death. And this was a matter of consensus in the Muslim world for a long, long time. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, who was the best student of Ibn Taymiyyah, writes a book called The Ruh, and in that book he talks about different types of spirits. And he talks about the spirits of the prophets and the messengers and the awliya as arwah mutlaqa, as released spirits. So people like Maulana Jalaluddin are like that. And therefore, when you go to visit him, which I hope we'll be able to do today, perhaps together, then you have to understand that you are not visiting stones or a mausoleum or, you know, a place of historical remembrance, but you are actually visiting him. And he receives your visit. And you don't see him, but he sees you. And his spirit is more powerful now than it was during his life. So this was a matter of consensus among us, you know, for a long, long time. Why is it more powerful? Because after death, they are no longer mukallafun. Mukallafun means, as you know, to be under the burden of moral compliance with the law. Therefore, the wali is always during life extremely careful. They've got to measure every word. They've got to weigh every action. When they go into the barzakh, there's no taklif anymore. Whatever they did is, mashallah, done. So this enables them then to interact with a much greater freedom than they would have had in this life. Okay, so let's get into our lesson. We today want to talk about speaking only about what concerns us and avoiding superfluous talk, excess talk. So just to review a little bit, we said yesterday that we are speech creatures, and we have this amazing gift of bayan, articulate speech. And this is one of your greatest gifts, just as this is one of your heaviest responsibilities. And that's why when we talk about silence, and silence is golden, you have to always take refuge in silence, because you only want to use speech when you know that it's good, and you know that it's beneficial, and you want to be as conscious about the way you speak as you are about the way you pray, or the way you fast, or the way that you do any other act of worship. And this is what lifts you up to incredible heights. And this is what turns speech for you and for me and for all of us into this amazing medium that gives us access to incredible knowledge, to learn it, to teach it, to live it, and ultimately brings us to God. That's what we want our speech to do. And we talked about a lot of examples. Speech is what makes you distinct. It is that special gift that you were given that was not given to the dog or the horse or the falcon. And this is a quality that we share with the angels. And the angels are pure light. And the angels are pure intellect. They're pure aql. And they use speech beautifully. The jinn also have amazing powers of speech, although they may use it falsely. And in that regard, the jinn will be judged as we will be judged. And they do good and they do bad. Generally, the jinn have powers of speech that we don't have. And this is because being created from fire and not from the elements, they have a spirituality that makes them very poetic. And language is extremely important to them. There is no limit to the good that your tongue can bring. We talk about silence. We're not talking about silence in the face of injustice. We're not talking about silence in the face of oppression. And when we use our speech, we want to use it to bring great good to ourselves and others. Today, in the chaos of the world around us that we see among Muslims and among others, it's so important that we find people who can teach us with clear words what is going on, what is the way forward. And speech also can bring us great harm, and there's no limit to the harm that it can bring. And much of the way that speech is used today in the media and in other things is very harmful beyond words. Remember the words of Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi: since you cannot bear God's unveiled light, drink in the words of wisdom He has revealed, for their light is veiled, and they unveil themselves as you purify yourself. It's very easy for us to use our tongues as a rule. Of course, this is one of the things that is so frustrating when we learn a foreign language. Because when you learn a foreign language, you feel like an idiot. You can't talk. You can't be human. You don't understand. It's one of the most difficult things of all to experience. And that's one of the reasons why some people don't want to learn foreign languages. Because it's like you remove yourself from the ranks of humanity, and then you go into the ranks of the mute. And you can't pronounce the words right, you can't make the sentences right. So that's extremely frustrating. But for most of us, especially when we speak the tongues that we've been speaking all our lives, it's very easy to do that, and we often do it without thinking. And we have to wake up to that. Our tongues can be the most obedient of all of our faculties, but as a rule, they are the most disobedient and the most harmful. And that's because we don't pay any attention to them, or we consciously use them to hurt others. And therefore, Satan uses our tongues, or has us use our tongues in a way that destroys us. So today, we want to talk about certain defects of the tongue. And Imam al-Ghazali, may Allah be pleased with him, focuses in the Ihya on 20 plagues of the tongue, 20 defects of the tongue. We won't have time to go through all 20, but we'll go through as much as we can. And he begins with speaking about what does not concern us and superfluous speech, because these are the least problematic. They generally fall in the realm of what is permissible. But this is where you need to work on your discipline. Because when you're able to speak only about what concerns you and to avoid superfluous speech, then it becomes much easier for you to deal with all the other types of problematic speech, which are much more difficult to control. And this is why you always want to begin where it's easy. Good character is the easiest form of worship. We heard the hadith of the Blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam yesterday. Shall I not indicate to you what is the easiest form of worship and the least demanding on the body? Silence and good character. All right, so this is where, good character is so important, but where does good character begin? In your stomach. In learning how to eat properly and to drink properly. And when you raise your children, it's one of the first things you should teach them, is how to eat properly. Eat with this hand. Chew your food before you swallow it. Try to eat all your food. I won't give you too much. I know you don't like the broccoli, but it's good for you. Eat a little bit. And don't just eat candy. And don't throw your food across the table. And don't reach across the table. Ask someone to give it to you. And don't throw the food. And things like that. Okay, that's where good character begins. And even for you and me, who have lived for decades, we still have to focus on that. Don't eat too much. Eat properly. Be thankful for what you eat. Chew it. Enjoy the delicious flavors that God has put in that food. A lot of us, we eat like a factory processing line, right? Get that food in there, it's not quite swallowed, got the next spoonful ready, okay, get it in the mouth and I'm still chewing. No, take your time. Chew, enjoy the food, swallow. And then also it's good to ask yourself, what if I were to stop eating now? wouldn't this be enough? Do I really have to eat this huge amount of food? It's really excellent when, according to the sunnah of the Blessed Prophet, we eat from a common plate. Because if you give me a plate of food, it's almost as if I've got to eat that. And what happens if I don't eat it? Will you eat it? So this often makes us eat much more than we need. Whereas if you have a common plate, you can just take what you want and suffice. And then other people who need more, they can take more. That's one of the blessings of it. And there's nothing wrong with eating out of plates. Some of the English Muslims that Sheikh Hamza and I knew years ago went to Morocco, and they had a great sheikh. And he put food in front of them, and he gave them spoons and forks. And they said, no, 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 we will eat with our hands. He said, no, 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 you will eat with forks and spoons. It's not my purpose to send you back from Morocco eating with your hands. We've got other things to do. You are used to eating with spoons, just go ahead and eat that way. So eating with the way we do, there's no big problem with that, but we want to not overeat. And also, we don't want to overspeak. Imam al-Ghazali, may Allah be pleased with him, he quotes one of the great early saints of Islam, al-Ijli, who says, there is a certain thing I have tried to do for 20 years, but have never been able to accomplish it. Yet I will never give up trying to finally get it. And they asked him, what is that? And he said, being silent about what does not concern me. And the Sahaba and the Salaf, they regarded this as extremely important. And we have to also not give up that quest, even though it may take us 60 years or the rest of our lives. Inshallah. Again, we talked yesterday about getting our tongues behind our intellects. This is a good dua to make. Oh God, put my tongue behind my intellect. I have a brother who's a really wonderful healer and a homeopath, and he's a hakim. He has ijazah in that. And I asked him, can you give me something to put my tongue behind my intellect? He didn't know what remedy would work. But that's what we want to do, get our tongues behind our intellect so we think before we speak. And we pay attention to what we say. And we weigh what we want to say before we say it. Again, as Umar ibn Abdul Aziz advised, and we closed with that yesterday, whoever regards his or her speech as part of their voluntary action, the action that you'll be judged about. You're not judged about what is involuntary. Why did you sneeze? Okay, you're not judged about that. Why did you yawn? Cover your mouth, but we can't help but yawn sometimes. Those are involuntary things. Even the suggestions that come to your heart, which come to you from God or from the angels or from the demons and Satan or from the self itself. As long as those are just suggestions, you are not held responsible for them, even though they might be ugly and they might shock you. How could that occur to me? I must be a terrible person. No, you're not a terrible person. There's a drama that goes on in your heart. As long as that remains involuntary and you don't act on it, then you're not held responsible for it. So we have to understand that we are held responsible for our speech. It is voluntary action, and it is extremely weighty maybe, just as you know, the salat, the prayer that you perform, the fasting you do, the pilgrimage that you did, these things are very weighty in the scale, but so are the words we speak. And we talk all the time. So we have to understand that this is also part of your amal. This is part of your voluntary action that God will take you to account for. And He will reward you for, or He will punish us for, or forgive us. And when we do that, then we will speak little except regarding what concerns us, which is the topic of the day. The Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, min husni islamil mar'i tarkuhu ma la ya'ni. And this is said to be, by our great scholars, one of those principal hadith that the whole of Islam orbits around. So he said, part of the good or the beautiful Islam of a person is that he or she leave aside what does not concern him. In the hadith, of course, it refers also about doing things that don't concern you, preoccupying yourself with trivial things or with nonsensical things. So it's very good to leave that. It's not necessarily obligatory. And we do a lot of things for, just to pass time. And a lot of that is, in fact, healthy for us. But part of the good Islam of a person is to put aside what does not concern me, to prioritize our lives. But this also pertains to speech. Speak about what concerns you. Do not speak about what does not concern you. And Imam al-Ghazali says that this means that when you want to speak about anything, you should ask yourself, if you remain silent about this, would that be wrong? Would that be sinful? Would that be cowardly? Would that be harmful to be silent about it? And so when I speak, then I want to make sure that what I say is calculated to be right and to be beneficial and to serve a purpose. And that might be speaking truth in the face of injustice, which the Prophet ﷺ spoke of as one of the highest forms of jihad. And it might cause you great trouble. How many great awliya have we had who could stand up to the ruler and tell him, you don't do this? And in fact, if we want to talk about the history of Islam, and we've talked about how the last 200 years have really been the dark ages for us. And we ask God to enable us to come out of that. And people like you are capable of that. You are capable of learning the way forward and showing the people the way forward. But one of the characteristics of Islam was that our scholarly class and our saints were economically independent. They were socially and politically independent. How so? Well, first of all, they generally lived on the basis of endowments that could not be touched. And so therefore, scholars who were associated with institutions or with other things, they generally are well-to-do. They have means, they have resources, and they don't depend on the government. Muslim ideologues in the 20th century have often found great pleasure in the statement that in Islam there is no separation of church and state. Well, have you ever studied our history? Well, we don't have a church, that's true. But the thing is that we have religious establishments. We have men and women who are devoted to knowledge. And we have saints, and they usually were separate from the state. And in fact, they tended to be the people who watched the state. And they were the only ones who could speak out. And again, this is because of the infrastructure of society as well as the dignity of those men and women. In the destruction of Islamic culture in the 19th and 20th and 21st century, and especially in the 20th century, this was one of the focal points. Destroy the independence of the ulama. Take away their awqaf. Someone like Sadruddin Qunawi, he's a great saint. He's a brilliant human being. He's one of the greatest of them all. But he was also powerful. And he was also unshakable. And he also had people that protected him and stood by him. And he didn't have to beg for his next salary. That's the way Islam was. And so for that reason, the religious scholar was usually watching the state. And he did not take from them anything. And he is the one who would say, you had better behave yourself. And that's why when the nation state, the modern nation state, is imposed on the world in the 20th century, the modern nation state is a very problematic institution. And never confuse the modern nation state, which is essentially totalitarian in nature, with the kind of governance that we had in the traditional Muslim world. They are as different as night and day. Traditional Islamic civilization gave you so much freedom, you would be shocked. The state intervened extremely rarely. And the main purpose of the state was to see that you were protected from enemies and to see that crime is also controlled and to see that the roads are kept open and to see that trade is free and to see that we have judges and things like that and to collect the zakat. These are the main things they did. And they didn't control the educational system. They didn't come into our daily lives. That's a very different world. And a lot of those rulers may not have been very good people. It's very difficult to have power and to be good. Have power and to be good, you have to be really saintly. You have to be really special. You have to be trained. Okay? But nevertheless, the harm that they may have caused themselves in their palaces, it rarely affected the people at large. And the scholars were always there to make sure it didn't. Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani never knocked on the door of a ruler in his life. And when the rich and powerful came to him, he wouldn't even stand up for them. If a poor man came in, he would stand up for him and sit him next to himself. Okay, and the rulers feared him. Both the Abbasids and both the Seljuks, they feared him. Because if he said, you don't do this, then you don't do it. And he's the one who puts together the jihad movement of Salah ad-Din Ayyubi and Nur ad-Din Zengi. Okay? He does that. What government does he have? None. But he has powerful standing before God and in society. So the destruction of the scholarly class and the saintly class, this was a major blow to us. And that's why also it is in our interest in Australia, in the United States, Canada, wherever we may be in the Muslim world, whenever possible, to try to restore the independence of the scholarly class and the saints as well. Today, most of our scholars are bureaucrats, meaning that they receive their salary and everything from the government. They are watched very closely, and they have no freedom to say no, unless they want to lose their job and lose their family, see their family go to prison and be tortured. There are a lot of other things like that that happen. So in any case, it is important to speak out. but there are also rules for that. And if you want that to be serious in society, then you've got to protect those people who do that. You've got to facilitate that for them. So therefore, when we speak, there are three things always that we have to consider that regards the speech. And this will tell us a lot about silence also. Is what I say true? Do I know for sure that this is right? So that's the first consideration. And often we may be absolutely convinced about the truth regarding certain people, when in fact we don't really know. Many of you do counseling in your communities, and you have probably seen over and over again how every situation has two or more sides. And even when a party is unjustly treated, and that injustice has to be redressed, as a rule, the other group also has a point of view. And that's why we have to try to be fair. And don't just listen to one side of the story. And what is the most lying form of speech? Akdhabul hadith. It is when my nafs speaks to me. Hadithun nafs. So this is where you have to be really careful. Because, and we'll talk about this more in the days ahead, but, we develop biases. We develop reactions, prejudices. We develop strong emotions. And we have to be really careful about that. And I would say that most of the bad opinions that we have about others are totally wrong. And one of the greatest things that you can accomplish is when you finally begin to take account of that. Don't have a bad opinion of this sister. Don't have a bad opinion of this brother. If indeed they are bad people, we've got to establish that. And again, does it concern me? Does it concern me? It might. Because there's certain cases where we have to know, is this person worthy of the job or not? Can this person be trusted with the money or not? Is this person competent to do the job or not? And then we have to speak. And actually, he's a wonderful brother, but he's not competent. Sorry. Okay, that's not backbiting in that case, because we need to know. But in general, it's we want to have a good opinion of others. And we don't want to take too much time talking about things like that. But if I were to go through my life, if you were to go through your life, we could come up with hundreds of examples of people who maybe when we met them, we thought, this is not a good person. This is not a trustworthy person. This person must be so-and-so. And he comes from this background, or she comes from that background. And then, how many times did you find, to your regret, that he was totally different from that? Nothing like that. Turns out to be one of your best friends, one of your biggest helpers. So beware of these insinuations that come to our hearts from ourselves. So you want to make sure what you say is true, that it's not false. And you want to make sure that what you say will not hurt. It will not harm. And in Islamic law, the avoidance of harm takes precedent over acquisition of good. This is a very important principle of Islamic law. Dar'ul mafasid muqaddamun ala jalb al-masalih. Avoidance of harm takes priority over acquisition of good. So therefore, when we speak, will these words hurt people? Will these words harm people? We have to think about that. And we have to train ourselves to be attuned to that. And how many times do we say things that are true, but they really hurt the people that we say them to? Backbiting is always that way. Because in backbiting, what you say about that person is always true. Yes, he is fat. Or, yes, she does have a lisp. Okay, true. But you had no right to say that. Why? Because he has honor in the eyes of God. And he must have honor in your eyes. And you have no business to talk about that. Okay, even though it's true. And if you were to say that in certain contexts, and he knew that you had said that, it would hurt him. It would hurt her. So, first of all, does it cause harm? And then thirdly, does it cause benefit? Will it benefit? And you notice how consideration of benefit, which is likely to be the first thing that comes to our minds, will be the last thing according to the Sharia. First, is it true? Are you sure this is right? Do you really know this thing that you're going to say about that person to warn others or whatever? And then, will it harm? We have so many people today who take it upon themselves to enjoin right and to forbid wrong, even though they don't know the ABCs of Islam. And you may have heard this from Maulana Shaykh Hamza, Allah bless him and protect him and give him a long and blessed life. He's one of the great ones of our time. But, I just lost my chain of thought. Can someone remind me? Yeah. Yes, so you may have heard this from Shaykh Hamza because traditional ulama, for the common Muslim who is not a scholar and has not learned this religion, for him to get up or her to get up to say, this is haram, this is halal, you have to do this, you have to do that, it would be better for him to go to the bar and get drunk. Because that would be a lesser sin. Okay, our people, we have to understand that. And most of the trouble we have today comes from the fact that so many of the spokesmen and spokeswomen of Islam are illiterate Islamically. They may have great enthusiasm. They may feel that they've got to do something. Okay, well, if you've got to do something, you've got to be trained. Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, may Allah be pleased with him, he is a blessing from the beginning of his life. And his mother sends him as a boy of 17 from the Caspian Sea in Sunni Persia. Persia was a Sunni bastion for 1,000 years. To Baghdad. And she says, these eyes will never see this beautiful face again. You don't come home. You will stay in Baghdad. And for the next over 40 years, even though the Crusaders have conquered Toledo in Spain when he was a little boy, they conquered Lisbon in Portugal when he was a little boy. When he comes to Baghdad, they have occupied Jerusalem, and they have destroyed many parts, of Syria, greater Syria. And we are in a huge crisis. You've got to do something. So what does he do? For 40 years, he buries himself in his books, with his scholars, with his teachers. He gets spiritual training, and he does not begin to talk until he is commanded by people who know him and have trained him that now is the time you've got to do something. And then the world begins to change. Imaduddin Zengi, Shir Ku, they take his hand. And Imaduddin is killed the next year. And then comes Nuruddin Zengi, one of the great ones of all time. And he will take the hand of Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. And then comes Salah ad-Din, who's a boy of about 13 years old. And Shaykh Abdul Qadir will develop him. Okay, and then they will put it back together. And this is the beginning of what we call the Great Sunni Reformation. It's one of the major events in our history. This is why Martin Links, may God have mercy on him, Abu Bakr Siraj ad-Din, he says, after Imam Ali, karramallahu wajhahu, and the Khulafa al-Rashidin, there never appeared in Islam a person that had such a dynamic effect and lasting effect as Al-Qutb al-Ghawth, Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. Okay, and that's not an exaggeration. What he did is unbelievable. But for 57 years, it's just study. And he became a scholar of all the outward sciences, a master of the Shafi'i school, a master of the Hanbali school, a mufti. He knew all of the qira'at of the Quran, all of the tafsir. He knew the ilm of fatwa and, all of these things, the secrets of the Arabic language. Okay, and then he also knows himself, and he has been polished, and he has been trained, and he was put through the mill. And then he's ready to do the work of God on earth. So that's the kind of example we want to follow. Follow the right people. You've got to follow the people who know this deen. They are the ones who are entitled to speak. And that would be someone like Maulana Jalaluddin. He is one of those people. But for the common Muslim, and may Allah protect us all from this, to begin to speak about the religion, without the adequate training and knowledge is worse than fornication. That's what our scholars say. I don't like to say that because I don't like to mention that word. But that's what the scholars say. That's what the scholars say. This is not a light matter. And how many times do we have in the United States, in Canada, these are the countries I know best, in Great Britain and in other countries. I'd love to know more about South Africa and Australia. Inshallah, I'd love to be able to go there soon. But, there we have the problem of opinionated people who they may pray 5 times a day, who then are saying, you can't do this, you can't do this, this is haram, that is haram. And they would do so much better just to be quiet. Just to be quiet. So the Muslim world today is in a very difficult situation. But don't ever think for a minute that to repair this is an easy matter. And you certainly are not going to repair it by getting out a gun. There are so many things that have got to be done. And we've got to train ourselves. We've got to learn this religion. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. How many minutes are left now? Okay. So, those 3 then. What? Truth, harm, benefit. And then there's a 4th quality. There's a 4th reality that, we have to look at. And that's the speaker. Why do you want to speak about this truthful matter that doesn't harm and that causes benefit? To show how great you are? To show how knowledgeable you are? To show what an authority you are? To show that you're better than the other people who don't know it? So then also, why do I do this? Because you want that to be right. You want that to be good. And again, you don't want to inhibit yourself. Many people who are really good, they don't get involved in beneficial activities in the community out of fear that they are hypocritical, that they are promoting themselves. Okay, this is part of the spiritual path so that you can do those things and not be harmed by it. But again, why do you want to say this? And you've got to make sure that I want to say this for the sake of God. I don't want to say this to show people how much I know. Every breath that you take, you've got to weigh and measure. How do you spend it? So inshallah, we'll come back to this next time. We still have a few minutes, but we want to go to Jumu'ah. And I think that I'll just look at these questions, inshallah. And maybe when we resume tomorrow, we can do like we did today, try to look at some of the questions. And then we'll continue with this because we didn't get all the way through. And then we'll go on to talk about probably being argumentative, because that's a very difficult type of speech. And inshallah, it's an honor to be here with you. May Allah bless your days here together. We live in a world where it's easy to be in contact with each other through all these different things the internet provides. And it's very important for us to remain together, even though we can't be together like this all the time. But we don't want to just meet each other and forget each other. It's very important to try to develop bonds between ourselves so that we can continue to work together, and especially so that, with the grace of God, we can do something beneficial in this time. You don't have to be told about how dark the times are. You don't have to be told about how difficult the situation is, but you get to work. You focus on yourself. You get with the right people. You get on the right path. And maybe Allah will make you one of the blessed ones, the most blessed of all people. Our Prophet taught us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, are those who are keys to open up the good. Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi is one of those for sure. And they are locks to lock down evil. How many hypocrites were cured by this great man? How many men and women enter the garden because of this great man? He was there to save them, to bring them back from the brink of the fire, to show them with a smile on his face and a beautiful, humorous insight what will give them life again. Okay? He was not there to promote himself or to establish his greatness, although he must be one of the greatest human beings who ever lived. And you want to be a key to open up good and a lock to lock down evil. And what are the worst of all people? Those who are keys to open up evil. The evil that was locked down, they opened it up, they let it out. We have a lot of those today. We've had a lot of those over the last 200 years, and before that too, but especially in the last 200 years. What has happened to the world is beyond the imagination of people before us. Keys to unlock evil. And they are locks to lock down good. Those are the worst. You want to be among the best. And in between those two, there are millions and millions of people who are looking for a way forward. And you have to be a light that can show them that. If you have 4 candles in the dark, they light up the dark to a certain degree, and you put out one of the candles, then there's a slight difference in light. And if you put out 2 candles, and just 2 are left, there's a little bit less light. And if you put out a third, there's just 1 candle, and there's not as much light. Okay? But those are relative. If you put out the last candle, it's absolute, total darkness. That's the kind of world we live in today. So we want to, each of us, light a candle. And these are the kind of things that you can learn from people like Sheikh Maulana Hamza and your other teachers. And being in this blessed place, how can you be that candle? And again, even though it's just 1 candle, and it doesn't light very much, but in total darkness, the difference it brings about is absolute. It's a quality, and that 1 candle can be seen from miles away. So may Allah make us keys that unlock the doors of good and locks that lock down evil. Allahumma wafiqna lima tuhibbuhu wa tardah waj'alna min abidika as-su'ada وأمتنا على كلمة الهدى علمنا ما ينفعنا ووفقنا للعمل بما علمتنا به واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما. آمين آمين آمين. See you tomorrow. Well, see you today. Maybe today we be able to do some things together. And thank you for your questions. Your questions are very good.